When you're living in a situation like this, you don't spend a lot of time doing anything but looking at what's in front of you. This is all the flooding of the Hurricane Milton that fell in the Green Swamp about 100 miles away about 2.5 weeks ago. Just shy of 16 inches of rain in 24 hours. And what's hard for people to understand is all this water is the rain from 3 weeks ago. People don't realize, if you read about it in the newspaper or you see 20 seconds of it on TV, this is living it. This would be washing out the foundation of my house right now had I not created the sandbag structure to block it. It's an amazing amount of water. During the end of the dry season, the last week of May, there was 4 or 5 feet of water under the dock before my entire seawall, which is now waist deep, was exposed and washing out when the boats went by. So this is at least 10 foot of additional water since May, and we have 5 more days before the river crests here. Crazy. And we've got 5 more days of this, increasing more each day. Where I'm standing, this was a nice manicured lawn 2 weeks ago. When the water recedes, there's gonna be a trench cut across my yard. I don't know what it's gonna be, but it's not gonna look like anything like it did before. See, this is the biggest flood event in 20 years. Before that was Hurricane Donna in 1960, but we can't compare it because this was all swampland. There was no subdivision here in 1960. The only flood event we have to compare it to is 2004, and we're almost there. I'll try to put this in comparison to previous hurricanes and previous floods. Hurricane Irma 2017 was a major flood event, and it was about 6 inches below where it's at right now. We've blown way past Hurricane Irma level. I mean, I could see the marks on the trees, but they're underwater now. 2004 was the next biggest flood event here. This flood event is very different, and it's hard to gauge, because 100% of this water is from upstream. None of this is rainwater from here. The actual crest of this will be somewhere around the 2004 flood, but because of where the rain fell and the different elements to it, it's hard to gauge. Probably 3 weeks ago, I was sitting on the dock looking at my phone, tracking that hurricane. Maybe a month ago now, I was tracking that hurricane when it was a Category 2. And they were talking about what it might turn into. This is a lot of water. I wanted to tell the story about this body of water behind us. It's a normal pond if you don't know the story, but it's kind of incredible for me to see it. 48 hours ago, there was not 1 gallon of water in that field. I just measured it on the GPS. We're 1.2 miles from the river where the flooding has occurred. And it's almost like magic that water appeared. I doubt if anybody knows what happened. The water worked its way through the swamp that is in between these 2 neighborhoods here, went all the way out by the highway, which is another ½ mile away, worked its way back up, seeking out the low spot, which is this pond. So we're over a mile from the river, and this low spot has filled in 48 hours and is still coming up. And there's no obvious way for the water to reach here. Now, the water was rising and rising until at some point, about 48 hours ago, it breached the highest point, separating the river from this pond. And now there's probably 2 acres of water there where there was nothing 2 days ago.
The difference between this spillway here, the English Dam spillway, is that this spillway here releases much more water to lower the lake whenever they need to, but it releases from the bottom. And that's the difference between our spillway and this spillway. Our spillway releases from the top, which is surface water. It takes us about a month to get around over to where our spillway is, but it's all surface water that we're getting. This water here is coming straight from the bottom, and it's got more proteins and minerals in it. Therein lies a big problem. If the English spillway over in the other part of the lower Withlacoochee was releasing from the bottom, that I believe our river would get more minerals and proteins and more spring water than it has currently been getting.
Because the river is at flood stage, it's around 3 billion gallons of water a day between this and the other English spillway, which is much lower volume. But to help folks understand how the river system works, this is a mixture of spring water from the Rainbow River, approximately 400 million gallons a day. That spring water from Rainbow Springs originates from the spring shed, the headwaters of the river. That is rainfall that fell months ago as far away as Williston, and even the catchment area for Rainbow Springs extends almost to Gainesville, Noonan Lake. That is water that fell a great deal of time ago, has worked into the aquifer, and then come back up in Rainbow Springs. So this is a combination of two totally separate sources of water that fell at different times and different places. They merge at the confluence of the Rainbow and Withlacoochee River and then flow down this way. So this is water that fell very different times, very different places, had very different ways of travel. The water from the Rainbow River has soaked into the aquifer. It could have fell last year, worked its way through the aquifer and come back into Rainbow Springs. The other 2.6 billion gallons is water that fell within a 12-hour period of Hurricane Milton and has just now worked its way down the river. So this water is a combination of two very different sources of water.
Hello, my name is Andy Murray. Do love this, what we're studying today and what we're talking about, because I've learned so much in just a few days.
Andy's a curator at the Historical Society Museum in Dunnellon. And Andy is fourth generation Floridian, and his folks have had a place on the Rainbow River since probably the 1950s, which is a long time. So they know the Rainbow River very well. And Andy's studied the histories. I don't know of anyone more knowledgeable to call on than Andy. We're going to speak in just a few minutes with the engineer that now helps us decide what we do with the water control devices that we have now in the Withlacoochee. So a lot of what we're trying to do is tell the different hurricanes, the impacts that they've had on the area, and also the flood control devices that we have and how we try to control the river. And we're going to have somebody, the most knowledgeable person about this. He'll be getting here pretty soon, hopefully.
I'm Dr. Mark Fulkerson. I'm a Chief Professional Engineer with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Milton was unique, and all storms are different. You know, you go back to 2004, you go back to Hurricane Irma 7 years ago, and you go back to 1960 and some of the big ones. They're all unique and different. Milton, I mean, it did come when the river was high. We were at our wet season, a nice high level in the wet season. I wouldn't call it normal, but maybe normal for the end of the wet season.
Well, normal wet season, yeah.
We weren't at flood stage when Milton came, but where Milton went and when it came and how much rain it dropped, where it dropped it was really the key, coming through Tampa Bay and then just dumping, 12 to 16 inches of rain in the Green Swamp, widespread. when the green swamp had no room to absorb anything else because it was full from the wet season. So a storm it's going to occur in late September or early October or mid-October is going to typically be worst case scenario if we've had decent rain throughout the summer, and we definitely did. We were probably above average rain up in those areas of the river from the summer. If it had directly hit Lake Pennsauken or even the river out at Lake Pennsauken, because that 15, 16 inches of rain would have hit there, would have shot the lake up, you know, a couple feet, and then it would have passed through. But because it hit in the headwaters of the river, that was definitely the key with Milton. It takes time for that water to make its way, and that's kind of the dynamics of, you know, when it hits the ground and how much can it soak in. Well, guess what? If we've been through the wet season, that groundwater is up high and the soils are saturated, so a lot of that rain is going to run off, but it takes it time. It doesn't happen immediately. And so for an area like where we are here today, which is in the bottom quarter of the river, if you will, downstream, you know, it can take that 3 to 4 weeks before big rains that hit up in the beginning of the river to make it down this way, and we haven't had a drop of rain. Where's all this water coming from? For a storm like Milton, and when we look at those historical alterations, like those smaller scale ones, you know, from everything that I've studied and modeled and looked at, I mean, they get swallowed up in the grand scheme of things, because, you know, folks will look at a storm like this and say, wow, if they would have just dug a bigger retention pond here, you know, it could have held all this water, or if they wouldn't have, you know, added this little bit of land here where they built up this cul-de-sac or this neighborhood. But I mean, when you look at the magnitude of water that came from the sky and then hit the land and then tried to make its way down the river, it's almost unmeasurable. Folks will always look to, well, what is the solution, or how could we have prevented this? You know, and how could you have stopped this, and why'd you allow this to happen? And you know, when I take a step back from that and I look at all the work that we do in our engineering group at the Water Management District, and we develop accurate floodplains and flood models and try to say, hey, here's where these high-risk areas are. If we get the kind of rain on a region like this is how high that river is going to get. So to me, those are the steps we take ahead of time to educate the public on, look, if you buy in this neighborhood or want to live along a waterway like this, you know, you have to realize that it's going to have fluctuations. It's going to be dry times, and you're going to be very upset with how low it is, and it's going to get very high at times. And I mean, there's no physical way that us or anyone else could have stopped the Withlacoochee from flooding this summer.
Think of the trillions they've spent on the Mississippi trying to manage that very same problem. I mean, when you go over and extrapolate all the money they spent in the 1800s on up, building levees and just unimaginable things like that, it's the same issue here.
You know, back in the 60s, they looked at the green swamp and they said, that was part of the old Four River Basin study, if you've looked at that, and they talked about, well, let's build this 23-mile long levee and let's dam up the green swamp, and when it floods in there, let's hold all that, and let's prevent these rivers from flooding. And they were going to build structures and say, well, let's turn a valve and we'll send it to the Hillsborough when we want. Let's send it to the Withlacoochee when we want.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, it did sound good. Thankfully, none of those projects ever happened, because it would have destroyed this ecosystem in this unique area that, by the way, us, the Division of Forestry, others have purchased all this land to preserve that area's natural function. If we didn't do that, here come the condos, here come, you know, the Walmarts and all those things, and pave it over, and then you're going to have a real flooding problem. So we've invested in the green swamp to, let's purchase the land, and we've got almost 200,000 acres conserved up there to allow the green swamp to do its thing, which is, in the summer, slowly fill up and store all those floodwaters. So obviously Lake Rousseau is an impoundment. It's not the natural river that it was back 115 years ago. And you know, previously it meandered much like this would have. Now this is at flood stage right now, so you can't even see the river really, but would have meandered through that area through cypress and pines, right? But you know, when they created the original Inglis Dam, it backed things up, and then there were the further alterations in the 60s with the Cross Florida Barge Canal project. So when the Cross Florida Barge Canal came and basically bisected the river that was downstream of Lake Rousseau and of the original dam, you know, that's when the Inglis Dam was rebuilt to its current configuration in the mid 60s, and then kind of as an afterthought, they said, oh wait, you know, we cut this barge canal through and we forgot about this other 9 miles of river that's not going to get any flow anymore. It's kind of an important thing. So that's when they built a bypass to come straight out of Lake Rousseau with an additional structure called the bypass spillway to send water down. The current configuration of things, which does not allow those historic high flows to go out the lower Withlacoochee, in a sense, that's a flood protection benefit for the residents that live on the lower Withlacoochee now. That's what I've spent almost 2 decades modeling, proving, and educating the public on, is just how the Withlacoochee functions. My first 2 summers at the Water Management District, we drove out in the middle of the green swamp, parked our truck, okay, found a staff gauge with elevations on it, took old survey equipment, a survey level and a tripod and a survey rod, myself and an old-time surveyor and a 18-year-old right out of high school, and we started walking, and it was during the drought of 2007, and we ended up going 40 miles through the green swamp, mapping out the river and surveying it, and where are all the holes, where are the highs, where are those rock outcroppings, what's the width, and all these things, and then we hired a survey company that wouldn't touch the green swamp because we didn't have enough money to pay them to do that level of survey. They jumped in an airboat, and they went from US 301 at Trilby all the way out the rest of the river, the remainder of the river, and surveyed it. So we mapped out the entire thing, and we put all this data into it to truly understand, okay, hey, if we get a 5-inch rainfall and the water level is already this level, what's the river gonna do? How's it gonna function? We took all the soils and the topography of the whole watershed, all the culverts in the farmers' ditches that flow into the river. We surveyed all those things, and we built a modeling tool that, by the way, wasn't just some modeling tool that we threw together in a year. It took us 9 years to get that tool accurate, because I kept going back and saying, no, we're not predicting, what the 2004 hurricanes did. We need to go back and what are we missing here? So we went back out in the field and gathered more data. And so we built this tool to be able to simulate how the river really functions, even if we had said, oh, guess what? Somebody called me and said, Hurricane Milton's coming in 2 months. Start preparing for it, which isn't practical. Even if we had just said, oh, we got this big storm, it's going to flood the river, even if we had a crystal ball to know that, and started trying to get water out 2 months ahead of time, when it's raining, it'll rain 1 inch in a day. Guess what? We can get it down, 1/8 of an inch the next day with the structures. Well, now the next day it rains 1 inch. So, we're continually balancing all that. But yeah, we did operations more intricately with Milton than we've ever done. We did everything we could.
What we're doing is we're finishing up a documentary about the Withlacoochee River, the Great Flood of 2024. That's in the rearview mirror. The water from Hurricane Milton has come and gone. I chose to try and document the story because I knew that it would be worth telling in real time for many reasons on many different levels.